This is Talk Business and Politics with Roby Brock.
And welcome to the program. I'm Roby Brock. We are glad to have you with us. Jessica Dean is a familiar face to Arkansas news viewers. She's been on the airwaves in Central and Northwest Arkansas for many, many years, but she's hanging out with Anderson Cooper and Wolf Blitzer now. So we are glad to have her. She's a CNN Washington correspondent. She joins us out of D.C. today. You will see her on the campaign trail. You will see her in studio and all over the anchor desk at CNN. Jessica, it is great to have you with us. Arkansas misses you.
Oh,
I hope you miss Arkansas.
I always miss Arkansas, and Roby, it's always great to be with you.
You're on the campaign trail this election year, and I want to get your perspective on what it's like being out on the campaign trail, being in Washington, D.C., the D.C. bubble, as it's well known. What's the difference between covering a story in Washington, D.C. and covering a story in, say, Waterloo, Iowa?
Yes, Waterloo, Iowa. I've gotten to know Iowa very well in the last few months. It is really interesting to see kind of the dichotomy between the two, because there's certainly, as we all know, the narrative that gets started in D.C., in New York, that you're kind of covering, take, for instance, the 2020 race from Washington and then covering it actually in Iowa. And I think what's been most striking to me is, for example, we have heard, impeachment is really driving the news cycle right now in Washington and has for so many weeks and months now. But when you get on the trail in, say, Waterloo, Iowa, or Indianola, or so many of these towns that I've been to, people are talking about health care. Those are the questions they're asking. They may be asking about President Trump in another way to these Democratic hopefuls, but they're not necessarily talking about impeachment. They're paying attention, but more than anything, Roby, they're asking questions about how do I make sure I can afford my prescription drug plans? What are we going to do about climate change? They want to talk about the issues. So that's been really interesting to see kind of the two different takes there.
Kind of get to wear two hats, it sounds like, at the same time there in terms of covering that stuff. Well, let's talk about some things in D.C., because from my vantage point here in Little Old Arkansas, it just seems like there's paralysis in Washington, D.C. Democrats don't budge an inch, Republicans don't budge an inch. To me, it seems very much rooted in their leadership. They try to keep their members in line. I think when you talk privately to some of these legislators, they will tell you, that they see ways to work across the party aisle, but that means losing some power if they're to do that. What do you see from your vantage point? Do you see anything that might change that? Might the presidential election change it? Might some change in leadership allow the parties to work together in a little bit more bipartisan fashion?
Yeah, and I think that voters would tell you generally that that's what they would like. But what's interesting, and to your point, is that maybe privately they say, I see a way to work across the aisle. But there's not a lot of advantage for these lawmakers to do that, to work with either, whatever other side it might be. Because if they go back home to their districts, they might get primaried from the left or from the right. Or if they might get monetary support that dries up. So it's a hard situation for some of these lawmakers because, you as voters, you get what you vote for. And if you are going to throw them out of office for working across party lines, or if there's any sort of penalty for that, they really are going to toe the party line to keep that seat. And it makes doing deals and working in a bipartisan way very difficult.
All right, so we still have some major political stories to unfold this year. I'm just going to run through a little litany of them with you here. We've got impeachment. We've got the Democratic presidential nomination. We've got both party conventions, the battle for the control of Congress, not to mention the fact that just on any given day, an international crisis could erupt or something like the coronavirus could take everybody off of whatever the news cycle's been fixated on. I'm going to treat this like Jeopardy. I want you to tell me, what is the one thing that is going to happen in this news cycle this year that you may be a little bit more focused on than the others, something that you really are expecting or have some sort of expectation for?
Yeah, well, I'll take the Democratic primary for 100, Alex. Or Roby in this case, obviously. But yeah, I think obviously because that's my focus right now. I've been assigned to cover the Democratic nomination for the 2020 race. So I have a lot of vested interest in that, in so much as that's where a lot of my time has been spent. And here we are, so very close to the Iowa caucuses, and we still it could be anybody's game. We still don't know how that's going to shake out, much less New Hampshire, Nevada, South Carolina, Super Tuesday with Arkansas in play. It'll be very interesting to see how this goes, and it's a really interesting time for the Democratic Party as they work out which way is the best way to move forward. Do they want this big structural change, or do they want a candidate that's going to work within the structure that already exists and try to move forward that way? And that's a big conversation. That's the heart of this argument, or decision that the Democratic Party has to make. And Roby, I've spent a lot of the last 6 months in these early states, and I still couldn't tell you what's going to happen. It's going to be very, very interesting to see how that progresses.
Yeah, voters always have the final decision, and we will see what the results of that debate is about before the end of the year. She is Jessica Dean with CNN, but she will always be Jessica Dean from Arkansas. We miss you. Thank you for your time. Come home soon.
All right. Well, thanks, Arkansas. I always miss Arkansas. Any chance I get to be home, I always take it.
All right. Thank you, Jessica. We're back with more right after this.